Hi, thanks for watching. I'm going to talk about Australia hosting Sri Lanka now. I'm sorry it's a little bit late. It's only been a week's time before the series actually starts, but had a few computer problems. And in addition to that, obviously I was waiting for these two teams to finish their respective series. Sri Lanka played New Zealand in Sri Lanka, a very disappointing result for them, and we'll talk about that a little bit. And Australia played a very entertaining three-test series against South Africa. Ultimately, they did lose by a test, which is what I thought would happen, but they played much better than I thought. Um, I think to some degree though that was a bit of a paper tiger. And we saw that. Though Australia did stay with South Africa for 11 days of that series and dominate in periods. The first day at Adelaide is one really good example of that. I think even though you look at Warner and Cowan making centuries and Hussey making two centuries, you can see in each of those innings that Michael Clarke was really like the key Jenga piece behind those runs, and they made a lot of runs Australia, much more I thought. I did say in that series that Clarke was obviously playing great. He was playing even better than I thought. I mean, this is literally unprecedented in most of our lifetimes. How we're watching Michael Clarke play. Mohamed Yusuf did something similar in 2006. He scored 12 centuries in a year, but this is pretty good. This is pretty good stuff, especially outside Asia. And you can see, 3 for 40, 3 for 55. And when Clarke came in and did get out, Australia all out for 163. So Clarke makes other guys better. He's always been a great player to bat with. Now he's hitting all his boundaries. So I think that the batting card probably looks, if you looked at just the scores, looks better than it probably is. I think, yes, Warner and Cowan did make developments as an opening pair. And getting back to this series, I think if they can't score against this Sri Lankan bowling attack with the new ball options that they have, or they don't have, more to the point, they don't deserve to open in test matches. I do think they'll have a big series, those two, at least one of them, and probably both will have solid series. I talked a little bit in my Sri Lanka New Zealand preview about how poor Sri Lanka's pace bowling options are, and Cowan and Warner both show genuine growth. They're not there yet. They're not test class openers yet, but they're getting there. And yeah, this is a perfect chance for them both to fill their boots. As for the rest of the card, obviously Ponting is gone, yay. And the 3-4 is still very much unsettled. Watson at 4 is just as bad an idea as Watson at 3, in all honesty. As much for his bowling, and that you saw in the Perth test how paranoid Australia were to bowl Shane Watson, and there's just problems all over the place, and how to handle him and the injury issues, and just such a high maintenance player. Obviously Clarke will score runs. As I mentioned, Sri Lanka didn't really take advantage of the opportunity to bowl their pace bowlers. They combined for just 12 wickets in the two matches against New Zealand. For 31.08, and an econ of 3.3, which is particularly worrying against someone like David Warner. And indeed Michael Clarke for that matter. Lots of runs here for Australia, even with Herat chipping away at them. I think they'll do fine on that score. Their bowling, obviously the question is who's going to bowl for Australia. We saw a lot of turmoil in their bowling attack. Pattinson in, Pattinson out, Hilfenhaus out, Siddle out, Johnson, is he back, is he not? Stark, and the Johnson-Stark thing is basically a battle for one role. Australia really want some batting depth. They really want a number 8 that can bat, especially as they're bringing Wade on, who also showed a bit of growth. But yeah, they really want a number 8 that can average 20 plus. So it's either be Johnson or Stark, because they look like the only two players capable of doing that in Australia's bowling attack. And they also happen to both bowl left arm and both bowl seam, and both basically bounces orientated West Indian seam bowlers. So that'll be interesting to see what happens with their pace bowling options there. Presumably Pattinson's out of the entire series, so Siddle I think should be picked. I think he's an important member of that attack with his old ball skills as well, and I think he'll play. Hilfenhaus I'm not so sure about. I think Stark will probably get a pretty good look. I think Stark probably is the guy that really wants to take that number 8 role, especially with those runs. I know there were cheap runs, but those runs in Adelaide, again, his batting is almost as important as his bowling. When Pattinson comes back in, they've got plenty of bowling options. Anyway, so that's Australia. That's my little wrap-up, sort of quick wrap-up, very disjointed about that series. Sri Lanka. I mentioned Sri Lanka's bowling problems. I'm not going to reiterate that stuff. Please watch the Sri Lanka preview if you want to talk about that. Less, my little illusion before about the 12 wickets in 2 matches from pace bowling at 31.08 against a really bad batting card. Not good. And when you come to Australia, you have no pace, and they've got pretty much no pace. Kulasekaru maybe, with a second look at him, maybe not quite so bad, but really not much going on here. And considering that Australia's batting pretty well, much better than I thought, even with my Clarke comments before, Warner and Cal still doing okay. Lots of runs for Australia. So I don't want to talk too much about the bowling for Sri Lanka at the moment. So I think I've covered that pretty well. They're going to be in trouble. Herat will chip away, but Australia will make lots of runs. So then the question is, Australia's going to win the series. I think the bowling problems are just so deep and traumatic. But I was doing a bit of research on this, and I looked at some of Sri Lanka's batsmen. So these are the ones everyone knows about. Tilakratne Dilshan's 36 years of age, by the way, which few of us think about. He's like such a young, spry guy, but these numbers are worrying. Let me go through them. Dilshan averages 29.28 against Australia. It's 8 matches, of which 6 of them are in Sri Lanka, and averaging less than 30. 13.3 score percentage, 15 century rate. Not good. Averaging also under 35 against all countries, scoring under 28%, and century every 13.3 since January 1st of 2010. So Dilshan's a batsman in decline who plays this team poorly, even when he gets to play them in Asia. So Dilshan, very, very big question mark if he can contribute anything. But you might say, well, Dilshan, sort of a peripheral player. We'll go to Samuel Wera, getting slightly more central to their ideas. 28.23 against Australia, 14.3 century, score percentage. Has never scored a century against Australia. In Australia, the numbers are even worse. 22.66 in Australia, 16.7 score percentage, and no centuries, obviously, as well. But again, you might go, oh look, I pretty much anticipated Samuel having pretty bad numbers outside Asia. I'm not too concerned about Dilshan and Samuel as long as the two big guys, Jawadina and Sangakkara, come to play. This is a stat really surprised me because I tend to be very hard, as you probably are aware if you follow these videos a lot, on older players. Jawadina is 35, actually younger than both Samuel and Dilshan. But it surprised me how poor he's been the last 2 years inclusive. He's only averaging 31.8, scoring in 22.2% of innings. About 1 in 5 times Jawadina walks the crease, he scores. And 11.7 century rate, which is still okay. But yeah, that's what's keeping the average not looking quite so bad, 31.8, but not scoring much at all. It's entirely possible we could go through this entire series based on those numbers and not see a score from Mahela Jawadina. Against Australia, not terrible, but bad. 34.91, 21.7 century, score percentage, which again comes back to that not scoring. He might not score in this series, in which case they're just absolutely toast. 11.5 century rate, and that's again with 9 of the 13 test matches against Australia in Sri Lanka. But the big fish is obviously Kumar Sangakkara. These are really interesting. Now you might go, well hang on, Kumar's got great numbers both versus Australia and in Australia. But just look at these numbers. These are all his series aside from a home and away against Pakistan. So leaving those out, look at 5 series he played. Against New Zealand most recently, he averaged 7, with obviously no scores and no centuries. Against England, before that, this is in reverse chronological order, England before that, 8.75, with again no scores. South Africa, averaged 30 even, 16.7 century, score percentage, 6 century rate. And then Australia, at home, 44.6, not bad, but not Sangakkara, 44.6, 40 score percentage and no centuries. And then against England, in England, 30.66 average, 16.7 score percentage, and a 6 century rate. You put all those numbers together, it's 5 series, it's not that small a sample size. You put those 5 series together, and you get 26.79, 16.7 score percentage, and 12 century rate. The score percentage and the average are very, very low, and it tells me that Kumar Sangakkara has just trouble just getting going, let alone centuries. Yes, if he does get going again, he can score centuries, great. But there's a lot of pace bowling in those attacks. That's the one thing you notice. Pakistan feeding just slow bowling all the time. Kumar Sangakkara has been an amazing player, one of the best of all time. But he's 35 years of age. All these players are old players. I've always been a big supporter, but those numbers look grim. And you're looking at a series or a possibility. It's a remote possibility, but a possibility that Sangakkara and Jawadina both don't score in this series. If that happens, Sri Lanka are going to be beaten by innings every time. Not enough here for me to be confident about them even drawing a test match, to be perfectly honest. Those numbers are terrifying if you're supporting Sri Lanka, because the bowling is not going to be there. Maybe one innings, but generally no. But the batting also looks extremely suspect. Maybe it will show up, but it is a big maybe. You might get 1 score out of 12 appearances from Jawadina and Sangakkara. I don't think you can count any more than maybe 4 at most. That's not enough. Australia win this series 3-0. Thanks very much, guys.